Welcome to EVONA Origin Stories, the space podcast where we look to bring you extraordinary leaders from within the sector and their fascinating stories of early life, career, and how they broke into the space industry.
This is episode 10. Our guest today started her space journey very young through science and math. STEM needs a huge rebrand. I think we can all agree, and our guest today is living proof that STEM is cool. She started reaching for the stars quite literally from as early as third grade, when she confessed to her parents she wanted to become an astronaut, which led her on to attending space camp as a sophomore in high school. Fast forward 20 years, and her career as a systems and operations engineer has not only seen her be on console for the first ever Dragon mission back in 2010, she was also instrumental in delivering and, more importantly, bringing back home Bob and Doug from the International Space Station in 2020. If that wasn't enough, she has now founded her own space company that focuses on operating systems for spacecraft and complex mission operations. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Laura Crabtree. Hey Laura, how you doing?
I'm great.
How's things? Busy?
Yeah, really busy. I was thinking, I have an hour for this meeting. There's no way it's going to take an hour. And then it took more than an hour. So then I thought, well, I'm going to have to message Rich so that he's not wondering where I am.
Always the way. Well, look, thank you ever so much for taking the time to do
Definitely.
This thing. We really appreciate it. Really excited to get into this.
Yeah, I read over your questions and all's good. Now that I can talk about whatever I want, everything's on the table.
Good. Well, look, again, thanks for taking the time to really, really appreciate it. We'll dive right in if that's okay. I'd like to start, I guess, for our listeners back from the early days of Laura Crabtree. Talk us through where you started in life, where you grew up, school, college, that sort of thing. Sort of how you found your way into your early career at Northrop Grumman.
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. So I will just go back all the way maybe to like first grade. And I was just very taken by math and science. I went to a Montessori school, and my teacher told my parents that they needed to put me in a school that would challenge me, which is the best advice that they ever could have given my mom and dad. And they put me into a school that offered the hardest math and science classes that I could have ever wanted, which is amazing. And from that day forward, I told my mom I wanted to be an astronaut. And that's basically what I wanted to do with my whole life, is work in space. Fast forward to when I was finishing high school, and I basically applied for, again, the hardest thing I could think of, which at the time was aerospace and astronautics. And I wanted to learn about space and orbits and orbital mechanics and going from one place to another in space and how it was different than terrestrial transportation. And that's what I did. I ended up at USC for undergrad. And when I was finishing undergrad, I started thinking about all of the different companies and things that were going on in the space industry, and realized that I didn't really want to move to Houston. I hate to say that now because I actually really like Houston, but I didn't want to move to Houston because it was really hot, and I grew up in California, so didn't want to do that just then. So I joined Northrop Grumman right out of college and worked for them in systems engineering, and started realizing that I think that, the industry had been the same way for a really long time. And, at Northrop Grumman, it was a very large corporation, and, things were really fun and I was learning a ton. But I knew that things were probably going to change after a couple of years there. And that's exactly what happened. So I think that's the early days. And I think the one thing that really helped me sort of put a pin in what I wanted to do is when I was in high school, which is not what people normally do in high school. I actually went to space camp in Huntsville, Alabama, which is a little bit nerdier than most high school kids want, but I was, I think, a sophomore. It was really amazing. And it pretty much solidified that I wanted to be in the space industry forever.
Yeah, I love that. I always find it incredibly inspiring when I speak to people like you, Mel Strickland. Like you find your calling so early in life. And I think that's incredibly rare. And I'm so jealous of it. I'm sure loads of people listening to us incredibly jealous of it as well, because so many people just kind of stumble through life. They fall into things. You know, there's so many people now in their sort of career where they've been doing something maybe like the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, but they don't really know how they got there. And they've just fell into a career. So I think the fact that you just sort of knew what you wanted to do so early in life is so incredible, and it's something you love as well.
Yeah, it was pretty intentional, both on my part and my parents, because they really helped enable me to make the choices I wanted to make in my career, which I'm so thankful and so lucky for that, you know, support in my life to be able to make those choices, because as you, I'm sure know, not everyone has that freedom and ability to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess now that you're sort of here now, obviously you've got your own business, you've been through the space sector, you knew what you wanted to do, you had that calling so early on in life. Now that you're kind of here and you're living it and breathing it, what is it that drew you to the space sector so strongly, and what is it you love the most about the space industry?
Oh man. So what I think, I didn't know anything about the space sector, or when I was young, I was just always enamored by the things you can't touch, the things that seem unattainable. And I wanted to go to space. I wanted to allow people to go to space. I used to watch shuttle launches, you know, before school, and follow all of the different launches that were occurring when I was a young child. And then I watched a lot of sci-fi with my dad. So maybe we can thank him for a lot of sci-fi and nerdiness in my life. But that sort of picture of what could be created in the future is, I guess, what steered me towards it. And now that I'm in the space sector, I think the thing that I like the most is the people. I have found such a wonderful group of people in the space sector. And it has grown from the Northrop Grumman days to the SpaceX days to now the startup days. And it just keeps getting better. I am so enamored with all of the people in this industry. I mean, everyone's so welcoming and supportive, and I feel very lucky to have found it.
Absolutely welcoming and supportive. I think, yeah, I'd echo those words. I think, well, I mean, I've only been doing this for the last 4 years now, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, the network of people, everybody, even people that you don't particularly know that well, that you've just been introduced to, everybody seems to want to collectively help each other and support each other. So it's
true.
Amazing.
Every person that I meet says, "Oh, can I connect you to my friend that does XYZ and that has his own startup or her own startup, and you know, I've got to put you in contact with this person. They're so amazing. You would love them." And I am so happy to talk to so many wonderful people that, you know, every time I meet someone new, I'm introduced to 3 more new people, which is, again, you know, just wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, if it's okay, we'd love to take the opportunity to touch on your time at SpaceX. Obviously, you played such a significant part in helping put the US back in the human spaceflight business. So, I mean, if you wouldn't mind just sort of talking us through that whole journey, that whole experience, and what it was like, how it was to play such a pivotal role in those missions over sort of spanning over a decade there.
Yeah, it's hard to put into words what happened over the course of 11 years.
Yeah.
But I will say, when I started there, we were a relatively small team, and I believe it was around 700. I don't have the exact number, but this was in 2009, before we had flown Falcon 1. And when I started, most people in my close-knit circle were asking me what was wrong with me. Why did I leave this comfortable job at Northrop Grumman to work at a, quote, startup that had not yet launched anything and might go under? And, you know, my response was, you know, I've got to take a risk. I feel passionate about this. I feel, you know, a pull to do it. And if it doesn't work out, there's always a backup plan, and there's always going to be another job. And that was my thinking behind it. You know, I wanted to change the way that the space industry worked. from how many people it took to launch a vehicle, to how we thought about operations, to how we thought about sort of challenging ourselves in our day-to-day lives. And I think that over the course of 11 years, we showed people how to think outside of the box in the space industry, how to perform more agile engineering, how to challenge themselves in ways that they didn't feel confident doing before. And I think that is the biggest gift that SpaceX gave to the industry, is that, sense of challenge again, and that sense of wonder. And I'm so thankful for all of the people that have gone into SpaceX, still are at SpaceX, gained experiences from SpaceX, because it did transform a big portion of, I think, how the industry works now. So yeah, I think, and going back into the missions, which is the other thing that you asked about, there are always a few that stand out. Obviously the first mission, which was just 2 orbits of Dragon and then re-enter. I had a friend of mine who has since passed sitting next to me, and we were both working recovery, because that's what you do when you're in charge of training and you've trained a lot of the people on console, and you didn't train anyone to do recovery because that was the job that you were always going to do. So I was sitting with him doing Falcon 9 recovery, and he was doing Dragon recovery. And I don't remember the exact odds we gave the vehicle, but it was not 100%. We'll just say that. Yeah. And when we finally launched the vehicle and everything was operating, we were looking around at one another thinking, wow, we did this. And then when it came time for re-entry, it was a very scary time, because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, you can plan for it and make sure that you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's and double checked, triple checked everything. But when the time comes, there's not that much you can do. And so during re-entry, there's a blackout period where you don't have communications with the vehicle. And all we could think in those minutes were, really hope we get a signal back from the vehicle at some point. And until it came back, there was a lot of held breath in the room. But when it landed in the water, it was a very pivotal moment. We had just accomplished something that was huge. And then we were invigorated to get to the C2 mission, which, if you remember, was the first rendezvous of a private vehicle to the space station. And, that mission was not a cakewalk by any stretch of the imagination. So that first mission, there was a long period between that first mission and the second mission. And it was definitely hard to get there. There were many, many long nights, many, many long days and sleepless nights, thinking, what are the worst things that could happen? But when we finally got there, it was, we've now done something that only countries have done. And the team that worked on that vehicle, especially on the operations side of things, were some of the most incredible humans. I mean, they were dedicated and talented and just really wonderful people to work with. And I don't think I could have asked for a better team. And the same can be said for the team that got Doug and Bob to station in 2020. That was another mission where when I started on the program, we were still writing the proposal. And I wrote the proposal for a lot of the training and operation side of how we were going to train our astronauts, how we were going to train our ground operations team, and then how we were going to kind of get to the cadence which we now see SpaceX has gotten to. And that timing was about 5.5 years from when we wrote the proposal to when we finally got Doug and Bob to station. And it was a long time coming, but it just shows how much dedication and perseverance the people at SpaceX had over the course of those years. So I think those are the biggest experiences and the biggest kind of hurdles that we jumped through during those years.
How crazy is to think that you were sort of on the console for the first Dragon mission, and even just the fact that you said that when you joined SpaceX, they were, relatively small, a startup. It just must be crazy to sort of reflect on that and reminisce and see everything that you've been a part of and how it goes today, right the way through to, like you mentioned, delivering the astronauts to the ISS in 2020. That's crazy.
Yeah, I have to look back and sort of pinch myself because like I see pictures of myself in mission control, and I see videos of me sitting in the room with like tons of people behind me, and I have to like remind myself that I was there, because I as you know, I'm living a different life now.
Yeah.
I'm the CEO of a startup, which is completely different than the time that I spent at SpaceX, although I still pull from a lot of the experiences that I had there, with the grit and the perseverance. But it's something I have to continually remind myself, because it is real, and it is a wonderful thing that happened, especially in this dark time of 2020, when everybody was sitting at home. So that was a very cool shining moment of that year.
Yeah, I remember it well. It was incredible. I mean, to be a part of that must just feel awesome. I've got to ask, when you were on the Dragon mission, when you went through that, you mentioned the blackout period, and everyone sort of had a hold of breath, and it eventually landed on Earth. Is there like a massive like cheer in the mission control center? Are you toasting glasses of champagne? Is everyone like
no? When Doug and Bob were coming home, there are some calls that the core operator makes, and it was one of my friends who was on for the reentry. I was on for the free flight period and the first crew sleep just after launch, and then my friend was on for the reentry. And during the blackout, the core operator will then say, "Okay, we're going into blackout in approximately 2 minutes, and we will expect blackout for this period of time." Now, the person on console and mission control will start trying to call the crew about, a minute or 30 seconds before they expect the crew to be able to respond. And that person will likely make 1 or 2 phone calls until they hear the crew response. And it's always that like heart-stopping moment. I mean, you know that you've done everything possible, but there is that like very slim chance, right, that they don't respond. Either they're, under high G, under stress, or something even more terrible has happened. But when Doug and Bob came back and said, we're here, we see, this altitude, and we're coming in at this speed, there were a lot of cheers. I wasn't in mission control at that time. I was actually upstairs at SpaceX. But I think at that point I started crying, because there was this massive relief in my whole body that I, had just gone through this hugely, I don't say it traumatic, but like pivotal thing in my life that really affected me. I mean, these were my friends, and I was responsible for their well-being, and to know that they were coming home to their families was a huge relief to me.
Yeah, it must have been such a high, but also after it all sort of happened and everyone was safe, it must have been so exhausting. Like, that's a huge adrenaline dump.
Yeah. There was a long sleep after that.
Good.
Well, I think for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely incredible achievement. And that's what I wanted to talk about next, is a bit around both really achievements and failures. I think with all the social media now, you see Instagram and Twitter and everything else. You all see like the highlight reel of people's successes and the achievements. You don't really see what goes on behind the scenes and all the grind, the sacrifices, you spending all in mission control and sort of leading up to those pivotal points. So I guess over your career, personal life, whatever it is, what would you sort of consider has been your biggest failure, but what have you learned from that?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. I don't know if it was a failure as much, but over the course of the years, I did sort of let my identity at SpaceX define who I was. And I don't talk about it a lot, but I had a significant other right when I started at SpaceX, and he and I got married while I was at SpaceX. And then we also had 2 children. And I wanted to be there for my kids, but I also wanted to be there for my SpaceX family. And I let myself kind of choose one over the other more often than I would have liked. And I think it was really hard to strike a balance between having young children and working at a job like SpaceX, which did take a toll on me a little bit. And so I learned from that experience how to balance my life a little bit better and how to bucket my time a little bit better, rather than, waking up at the early hours and ignoring my family. I am now able to say, okay, between this hour and this hour, we have family time. And between this hour and this hour, I have work time. And later in the afternoon, like, I have family time and then I have work time again. So really finding the rhythm of my schedule was what came out of that. And I think that was hugely pivotal for me.
That's amazing. I think there's so many people, myself included, by the way, that really struggle, especially when you're driven, ambitious. It's so hard to balance family. I've got 2 young daughters, and I still get really guilty now. They're 4 and 7. I feel like sometimes I am just missing parts of their life and them growing up.
Yeah.
So it's challenging. It's really hard to want to sort of have that drive and that sort of relentless ambition, something, and work hard, and also balance, family time as well. So
it's true. Mine are 5 and 7, and I wanted to make sure that I could be there for the pivotal moments of their life, because my son had a presentation of his science experiment, and he was so proud of it, and he wanted me to be there. But in the past, I might not have been able to be there, but I can now, and I am empowered to make those decisions. And I at some point, I just didn't feel like I had the power to make those decisions. And so getting back to that was really important for me.
Good. Amazing to hear. I'm glad you got the balance right now. Like I say, people spend years trying to do that and can't get it right. So great to hear.
I know it's a hard thing to talk about, though, too, because, I do want to work as hard as possible, but I think we should talk more about being able to have all of the things you want, which includes, if you want to be able to hire a nanny, then you should. If you want to be able to be there for all of your kids' pivotal moments, then you should. If you don't want to have kids, then you should be able to make that choice as well. It's whatever means having it all for you. I think that's really important to define for yourself and really strive for that balance, work, life, play, travel, whatever it might be for you, because there's such a faux pas with talking about it these days. And I think we have to be more comfortable with it.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And on the flip side of that, on failures, what would you consider so far your greatest achievement career to date?
Oh gosh. I think it's our first mission to station, because we proved not only to ourselves and to NASA and to the United States, but to the world, that a small company who some people have written off can do great things. And that really was the catalyst for a lot of the things to come, the award of the Commercial Crew Program, the success of the Commercial Crew Program, now with, the future of the Polaris program and Axiom. So all of those things were built on the foundation that we built back in 2012, which is, we can rendezvous at the space station. We can build a capsule that takes cargo to the space station. And everything else kind of stems from that, is in my mind at least.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I wanted, if it's okay, it'd be great. I'd love for you to sort of tell our listeners and give an overview, sort of snapshot of your business, Epsilon3. It'd be great just to talk to them about what you guys do, what your plan is. And it'd be great if you could talk them through, where do you see Epsilon3 over the next 5 years?
That's a great question. So Epsilon3 was born out of a lot of the experiences that I had, both at Northrop Grumman, at SpaceX, and then a lot of the people that I talked to after I left SpaceX. I obviously worked a lot in the operations side of things, and I had seen a lot of tool development. I had seen a lot of different types of things be utilized for kind of organizing and executing your operations. And so what we came up with was, after talking to a bunch of space companies, realized that there isn't a cohesive platform for kind of planning and executing your operation when it comes to sort of your operational procedures. And so Epsilon3 makes all of the procedures of the past completely digital, with full traceability of actions that were taken. It also includes sort of the writing, reviewing, executing, and as run. And we're also incorporating command and telemetry. So when you think of your GUI that you're looking at to evaluate telemetry, we bring that into Epsilon3 so that you don't have to look elsewhere to run your operation. And I think the future of what we're going to do is not only obviously just in this procedure space, but in the entire sort of platform that helps companies run all of their billion-dollar missions and make sure there are no mistakes made, and make sure they have traceability of everything that they've done and when they did it. So that is the future of what we are doing. And we also want to integrate with a lot of the other tools that people are utilizing. So when it comes to requirements tools or post-processing or planning tools or trajectory analysis, any of the other tools that people are utilizing, we want to help bring those things together so that you don't have to look 5 different places for what you're supposed to do and when you're supposed to do it. So hopefully that gives your listeners a pretty good picture of what we're doing and how we're going to get there.
Amazing, thank you. And the next one I want to talk about was around advice. I'm sure over the years, and this sort of leads on more to the question after this one around mentors and all that kind of stuff and support. But what would you say over the years, and whether that's at college, at uni, in personal life, friends, family, anything professional, what would you say is the best and the worst advice that you've been given over the years?
The worst advice that I've been given, I'll start with that. Someone told me, Laura, you can't have it all. And I said, well, you don't know what having it all means to me, so I'm just going to define that for myself and make it happen. The best advice doesn't have to do with work, but kind of has to do with kids, which is strange. And she said, you will never have enough money and you will never be ready to have kids. And I kind of think that goes the same with work, is you're always going to be striving for something else and you're never going to be completely ready, but you kind of have to just dive in and go for it. It's always going to be a little scarier than you want it to be. It's not going to be 100% comfortable, but nothing amazing ever came out of everyone being comfortable.
Absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think when you push yourself outside the comfort zone, I think that's why so many people say so stagnant over their careers. They just never take the jump. They never take the plunge career. So
yeah. And it's funny because people will say like, well, I don't have experience in the space sector. How am I going to get into it? And I think the thing for me is you have to have a passion and you have to know what you want to do. If somebody says, hey, I want to work in space, how do I do it? I said, well, what do you want to do? There's a million different things you can do in space. You can do Earth observation, you can do LEO, you can do GEO, you can do communications, you can do in space communications. I mean, you can do human exploration. There are not only a million different things to do in space, but there's also a million different roles at all of these companies that don't always have a space background. But I think the main common denominator of people in the space industry is a passion. They have a passion for something in the industry, some piece of the industry, some thing that they want to develop, something that they want to see happen. And that is kind of the theme that I see running through us.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of ties on to the next question around resources. I think with those people that you're mentioning around, they want to get into the space sector. They don't know quite what they want to do, but they know they want to be in it. And people are trying, like us, we're trying to, I guess, demystify the space sector and try to make it accessible for everyone. Yeah. What would you say, sort of, again, over the years, whether that's through the educational system or, mentors, what has been the best sort of resources that you've identified and been able to utilize over the years, whether it be courses or programs or mentors that you found have helped you the most over your career?
Yeah, I'd say things that have helped me probably aren't things that would help other people. But if I was new in the industry, I mean, this is going to sound really silly, but Twitter has such a good space culture that would be like my first stop. Is I would follow all of the astronauts on Twitter, and I would learn as much as they are sharing. I would watch all of the YouTube videos from all the astronauts, and then I would go into LinkedIn and find all of the space companies and look at what they're doing and try to understand what their tech is, what's differentiating them, and sort of find where my passions lie. I would also subscribe to a bunch of the different newsletters that are out there. So I've got friends running a couple of newsletters. There's one called Orbital Index and there's one called Payload. Both of those newsletters have a lot of really good information. They also go into funding and different series of the startups that are coming out, which I think would help kind of paint the picture of what the startup scene looks like in space, as well as what the large players are doing. I think that's probably where I would start. And then I would buy books, lots of books.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I agree with you. It seems to be all of our, pretty much all of our clients are on Twitter. Twitter is definitely, I agree, the strongest social media platform especially for commercial space, most definitely.
Yeah. And I think LinkedIn is like second, but Twitter is a more open forum, and it's easier to find things in my mind, and it'll also suggest a lot of new people. And I'm not like a person that loves Twitter, but I will say that the space business is pretty good on Twitter.
Good. Well, thank you. Thanks ever so much for taking the time to go through that. Our sort of final question, you've kind of touched on it already, but how we like to sort of close out all of our episodes, we ask everybody, if someone came to you, whether that be a friend, former colleague, family member who really, really wanted to get into the space sector. I know you talked about passion a lot just there. What would be like the main advice you'd give them? And this is regardless of what industry they come from, whether
right.
Engineer, solicitor, what advice would you give them to get into the space industry?
Obviously I would ask them to find what their passion is first, which I already touched on. But I think the hardest thing when people come to me and say, I want to get involved in the space sector is, what are you good at? What are the things that set you apart from other people? And how could that be useful? So, I have friends that are doing business and planning and finance and HR and all in the space sector. And through all of those things, they learn about the sector that they're working in. And so you don't have to have a specific degree to work in this sector. You just have to know where you need to go. Because if you would come to me and say, hey, I want a job, I would look at your resume and say, okay, well, what kind of job do you want? And how can we sort of bound the problem and then find that realistic kind of first step for you? That would be my best advice.
Absolutely. I think there's so many people, especially with especially with all of the, commercial space is very sort of in at the moment, the last few years.
Yeah.
Grown exponentially. I think the mission that you were, I actually personally believe when people say, the space market's booming, commercial space, where it all stemmed from, I actually personally think it all really, really started to kick on from that mission that you're involved in with Bob and Doug. I think that was asked globally for everybody. Like you said, Pete, it wasn't a great time. People were locked in their house. Everybody who even were not that interested in space before, people that were never really taking notice of space, tuned into that. And they watched that live, and when it docked to the ISS and stuff, it was such a profound moment. I really, really think that sent ripples through every industry, through the globe, and really enticed people to want to get involved in the space sector. So yeah, thanks ever so much for sharing that advice. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. It's like that time in a generation where people will say, where were you when X happened?
Yeah.
Hopefully that's how we're remembered, and being that shining light and really kind of kickstarting the industry to continue on the path that we had started. It's just really exciting to see how far we've come in such a short time, and there's still so much to be done, I'm sure you know.
Yeah, and it's just so amazing to say that you were such a massive part in that pivotal moment in history as well.
Well, thanks.
Amazing. Well, look, Laura, thank you ever so much. I've kept you long enough. I know you're busy, so I'll let you get back to work. But I just want to say thanks ever so much again for taking the time and speaking with us today. I'm sure we'll catch up again in the future.
Yeah, of course. No problem at all. It was joy speaking with you, and hope this was useful for some of your listeners.
Excellent. Thanks, Laura. Take care.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Cheers, babe.